Hello, everyone. We're back for another episode on Birth the Middle Way. And today, Emma and I are here with a beautiful sister, woman, mother, and midwife named Catalina Clark. And Catalina and I are both in the same program right now, studying under Wapio in the Matrona. But she is a very unique woman, and her path has a unique story with very beautiful experiences that can really weave worlds. Catalina is a licensed midwife and started her journey as a doula, woven to the traditional education, our modern day traditional education around birth and midwifery. And then she was maybe initiated or transformed by her own pregnancy and birth experience, which maybe I'll turn over to you, Catalina, and allow for you to just maybe speak into a little bit more with detail, and we can follow your story and the medicine that is available for everyone listening.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. My name's Catalina. I'm a midwife and a mom, and I live in Sonoma County, California with my two children, Sebastian and Georgia, and my husband, Ben. And yeah, wow. I came to this path actually, if I'm gonna just start at the very beginning, was through a loss, through the form of an abortion, which was like my real true first initiation into this work. It transformed me. I left my corporate job and pursued the role of a doula. And actually, the first time I ever heard the word midwife, and this is so connected to my story, was I had a yoga teacher in Brooklyn, and she was from she had lived in New Mexico, and she had worked with traditional midwives in New Mexico, and she was like, "Oh, you want to be a doula? You should become a midwife." And I was like, "I don't know. I don't have to go be a nurse or train and get a license." And she was like, "Well, you don't have to do that." And I was like, "Huh? Like, what are you talking about?" But I didn't actually have the awareness to like deeply investigate that right at that time. I was just like, no, I'll just be a doula and then I'll go become a nurse and become a midwife. So I was actually on that path first. I was a doula in New York City, which was super wild. And then I was going to community college to take prerequisites to become a nurse midwife. I was going to go to NYU. I was going to do the whole thing. I was going to change the system from the inside, as a nurse midwife working in the hospital. But when I became a midwife, I mean, when I became a doula and I started working in the hospital system, I was like, no way. There's no way I'm interested in this. Like, this
Can
is
I
not
ask
for me.
why? Like, what stood out for you in that setting?
Just that, that realization that this system isn't actually broken. There's nothing actually to be fixed here. This is I think the way that it is designed. And that's not to say that there aren't people in place who have the capacity to create some level of change, but like on that fundamental level was that like realization of like, oh, this is what's really going on here, and I'm not interested in playing that game or like getting involved in that. Like I'm on a different, yeah.
And what did you see that was like really going on? Like, if you could like name it a little bit in terms of, because it sounds as though the way you're explaining it, as though there was like a repulsive kind of experience of like something was illuminated and it was like a, oh, that's not for me kind of experience.
I think it wasn't until later on when I really truly had this realization, because what it was is, first of all, I just witnessed and held so much trauma and abuse in the hospital. And I hadn't also yet found like my advocacy voice. Like I was a brand new doula, never seen a birth before. And the first birth that I saw was like, the first many births I saw were like non consensual episiotomies. And that was normal. That was what I was seeing every single time. And then, of course, I was internalizing it like, I'm a bad doula. Why? What am I doing wrong? But then the pattern was happening over and over and over again, even as the advocacy was getting stronger and stronger. So that's just like one example that I can give you. And I did ridiculous things. Like I stole women's placentas from hospitals because they wouldn't release them for them. I got banned from hospitals. I sort of became kind of fierce in that
Birth
way.
rebel.
I mean, it got to be
Oh.
that way, and so but that
Right.
really supported me in like finding my voice of like she said no, like take the catheter out, like she's asking you to take her catheter out because she's pushing. You're saying you have to keep it in. She's saying you have to take it out to the point where I'm like, your patient is saying no. Like I had to spell out all of the informed consent for them.
How did that land for them in your experience? Were
Yeah, they
they
they got it.
like,
They got it at that point because it's
yeah,
like I was speaking their language. The
right.
midwives around me, were like a little bit shocked about my persistence because
Assertiveness.
and assertiveness
Right.
because especially in a transfer situation with a midwife, the midwives in my experience sometimes really tend to back down because they don't want to disrupt their relationship with the hospital, and so they have that's where the line kind of shifts between doula and midwife, right, where like doula and midwife also for me in my experience is also we are working for the women. We don't work for the hospital, but there's that added layer of that relationship that the midwife and a lot of doulas also want to remain the good girl. They want to remain in good standing with the hospitals. And so they don't always advocate for their clients.
Right. With the example of the catheter,
Yeah.
this woman is saying, "No, I want the catheter out. I'm pushing." As a doula, as a midwife, how do you navigate that sort of world where the is intuitively like, "No, I'm pushing. I need this out of me." But then a doctor is, wanting to support this woman in her delivery in the way that they know how. How do you like hold the wisdom and the knowledge that a doctor
So this was a more unique, nuanced situation. This
right,
mom had a sodium imbalance because she had a castor oil induction and she was really dehydrated and her minerals were extremely imbalanced to the point where they were concerned that she needed to be in the ICU, that she could have a stroke, that she could go into a coma. And so they were monitoring her ins and outs. So she was on IV fluids and they were checking all of the urine that came out of her to see her levels. And so this was on the chart, like the nurse was not allowed to take it out because they wanted to monitor this potentially high risk situation. And so, however, when it came to the time that her baby was about to be born, if a catheter is left in the urethra, if you can imagine, as a baby is coming out of the birth canal, this could be significant damage to the bladder and to the urethra. And so it wasn't a matter actually of like just this was the way that this provider um, managed birth. It was a protocol that the nurse was following blindly, not based on what was actually happening in front of us right now.
right? And I think that key word that you mentioned was like the potential for a high risk situation.
Yeah, and the fact that, well, she just needs to give birth to her baby and you could put the catheter right back in, like it was like a common sense kind of situation that sometimes in this medical system they can't really see outside of the box on the screen of what is ticked, to look at what's actually happening right in front of us.
And the other word that sticks out, right, is protocol, right? And so like that's a whole conversation in and of itself, is like what I hear you speaking to in different kind of semantics is this woman was not able to actually even see what was right in front of her because more of her consciousness was oriented towards following the protocol, right? And that's for a good reason for her, right? Like we have to acknowledge the power of that protocol, right? And how much people within the system are educated to be oriented towards it and to kind of see it as a holy grail, right? Oh, all of this research backs this, and this is going to be the best way for most women. And so if it's the best way for most women, then let's just kind of place it onto all women and kind of leave it at that, rather than having more of a dynamic care model, right? Where there's a capacity to meet the woman in front of us, to meet the moment in front of us, right? Exactly like you're saying, like, okay, can we just all hit pause, take a deep breath, recognize there's a woman in front of us giving birth, a baby's moving out of the vaginal canal. There's something that's going to be like, there's pressure, right? We have to understand where the urethra is, right? And what that's actually entailing. And we have a baby coming out, putting pressure on all of that area, basically compressing something within that canal that is the urethra, to the point that exactly what you're saying, Catalina, is that it can cause actual damage. So why not just take it out, let the baby be born, and if there's things we still want to be monitoring post-birth, reinsert.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And that kind of damage with like a urethra damage or like bladder damage and the birth canal, like those sorts of fistulas are the most difficult to repair. There are fistulas that are a lot simpler, but that is one complex from what I've learned and understood in the research that I've done. But it's also so interesting. We're talking about protocol. I start to think about this phrasing that you use, Sam, of, well, if this model of care is good for most women, but every single woman to about their birth, they always say, well, I have a unique story. And isn't that true for every woman? Isn't every woman's story unique and isn't nuance?
Yeah, and there's also the other side to this story of the protocols and why they're in place and why they have to be in place in the hospital in order to manage the system, right, that they're in. And the other side to me is like, well, look at the babies who are missed, who are stressed or in distress on Pitocin. Look at the moms who have hemorrhages postpartum that go missed. They don't know that these things are going on, even though they're following the protocols. So they're not also seeing what's in front of them because they're just following these protocols based on
Right.
when and what they're supposed to check and look in on. And so I think I just want to speak to like these protocols are in place for safety, and in most cases like they do support the hospital system, right? In their checks and balances, but also there's so much that's getting missed.
Right. So I have a question actually with that. And the question is the system, in your experience, and doctors and nurses and the conversations that you're seeing happen? Because I've attended births in the system, but very few and many, many, many years ago. Also very naive and very early on in my birth kind of experience. But were you experiencing like the conversations oriented in a direction that the only thing that really was the main goal was life for mom and baby? Like when there were complications such as, tearing, or what else did you mention? You mentioned hemorrhage, you mentioned fetal distress after, did you, or even baby needing to go to the NICU, whatever there might be, other complications that can arise, but mom and baby are still alive. Are the nurses and doctors talking about that birth in a way of like, oh, it was a success, or are they, oh, I wonder what caused that hemorrhage, and trying to debrief and trying to understand the connections and the links and what's going on to cause complications?
No, no, not at all. I mean, it's just that they saved the situation, like I have seen long inductions end in a woman's uterus falling out almost to the floor. And they just stick it right back in without any conversation about what or why this happened. So that's not really a big part of the conversations that I've ever been a part of. It's like we're just going to fix what we've done.
Why do you think that is? Like from just a human contemplation, from like contemplating the psychology, like educated people that want they obviously go towards these career paths wanting to serve and wanting to do good. So why is there not more curiosity going on here in the system and more conversation around these things?
I don't have the answer to this question, but it's something that I'm investigating a lot myself because I've been looking back on the doctors and the OBs who I do know and who I have studied with, and I'm even reading like Michelle Odent, right? This OB from like the olden days, like the 50s and the 60s, and he knew all of this. Like everything we're learning in Wapio's class is a lot of it actually comes from a medical doctor who was trained and practiced in the system. And so, like, how did this information not get recognized, right, into the mainstream? And I've also, my first preceptorship was with Dr. Stuart Fishbein. He's kind of a radical guy. I don't know if you know about him. He's an obstetrician who does home births with breeches and twins. So, and he left or got kicked out or lost his license in the medical system. Not lost his license because he's still practicing, but he was no longer welcomed in the hospital system. And so he went on to do home births and really good things. And um, he talks a lot about just the cognitive dissonance within the hospital system. And actually, I was thinking about this very question last night, and I I do not know. It doesn't make sense to me
Doesn't.
at all. At all. Um, I do have experiences I'll share. Recently in the hospital, I had a beautiful home birth transfer experience, one of the most profound healing birth experiences I've ever witnessed anywhere. And this mom and I were very connected. She was in her advocacy, as was I, and everyone in the room knew that she wasn't going to be not listening in like a defensive way, but like she was going to be guided by herself. And if she needed direction, like she only had eyes for me in the room, if she had eyes for anyone at all. And they saw that, and they gave us a lot of space. And so when the birth happened, after the OB came in, she actually delivered the baby to the head until the OB arrived with me, which was very rare. And then the OB just delivered the baby onto the bed as she was laying down, like it wasn't broken down. She wasn't in stirrups. It wasn't like a whole scene, because that wasn't what she wanted. And then the doctor left us alone with the mom and the baby attached to the placenta. She left for like a half an hour. And she came back, and I just whispered to her, I was like, "Hey, do you think you could just leave the cord attached while you deliver the placenta?" And she's like, "Sure, no problem." Never in my life have I had this happen in the hospital. I know it's possible. I know people have done it, but it's kind of rare, at least in my experience. And then she's like, "Here's the scissors. You guys can cut it when you're ready." So mom and baby and placenta are in the hospital. And then the doctor whispers to me, and she goes, "I'm just as crunchy as you guys. You just don't know it." And I was like, okay, so like maybe there is, right? Like who they are in reality versus, the ways in which they practice. And there's a lot of of integrity because I actually was at the hospital with the same doctor the week before, and that mom desired so badly a delayed cord clamping. She ended up in a cesarean, and we asked very clearly, we were like, "It's non emergent. Please leave the cord attached. This is the most important thing to me." And that doctor cut the cord immediately, and that mom was devastated. And this is the same doctor who whispered to me that I'm just as crunchy as you. And
Wow.
so from one birth to another, from one day to another, from like who knows what happened with that OB, like at the births in between those births.
Mhm. Or if there was new information that was coming forward that maybe influenced, like, okay, no, we're cutting this cord right away, or if she saw maybe less risk with the birth that you told just previous. But I am curious, that birth that you described, the emergence seemed to go fairly. And so I'm wondering what for the transfer, if you
Well,
want to
that was
share.
the mom's wish to
Okay.
transfer.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So there was nothing that you had seen that you were like, okay, we transfer something.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, it was her first home birth. It was her second baby. It was a VBAC, and she had been like 9 centimeters for like 12 hours or something, and she needed and wanted a rest. And so that's what we did.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, to paint that picture and um just speak to that, like how one practitioner can move so differently in different birth spaces. And I find myself just kind of sitting here contemplating that, like, wow, that's a very peculiar thing. And then, my mind jumps to, well, I also feel like I'm different in different births, but it's a different thing, it's because of intuition and connection to that mom, like and really standing back to observe the situation and the dynamic and follow her lead and follow her subtle cues versus. And so then I'm curious, like, what's happening there, and yeah, Emma, you did name like maybe there was more concern in that birth, but Catalina, you're also saying like it was non-emergent, and if there was new information that would have been told to you afterwards, there would have been a debrief about that. It's not like the doctor would have just continued on and like not have said anything. So it sounds like you actually
I
know with
think,
clarity that wasn't the case.
well, I think what we're dealing with again is another situation of protocol and procedure, right? Like we're having a cesarean
Right.
section, which is very, for the most part, it's a high risk surgery, right? It's a common surgery. But again, we're dealing with a very procedural situation. And so, maybe in the birth room, there's like spaciousness for that kind of thing. But when it comes to the OR, they haven't wrapped their minds around it quite yet, even though we know it's possible because we see things like gentle cesareans and skin to skin, and we know it's possible. But when I go into hospitals and I try to get into the OR and I try to advocate for these things, I haven't seen it happening in my experience yet. I only see like, on Instagram every once in a while this beautiful cesarean, and I'm like, is this an isolated event or are we doing this now? You know?
Right. And I have so much curiosity. Oh, sorry, Emma. Do you want to go? Okay. Yeah, I have so much curiosity around that as well, because I feel like part of our intention in Birth the Middle Way and having these conversations is very much so to be curious and open around like what shifts can be made and how can we go about that? How can we start the conversation? And so what's coming up for me right now is like you're saying like there is protocol. And so why is protocol the way it is around cesareans, specifically kind of with this rush dynamic and rushed energy? And so I guess my question is like, is the OR like backed up, like mother after mother after mother, and they have to like clean it up so that the next person can get in? And like, is the system actually just backed into a corner and not able to really create more spaciousness for these beautiful kind of natural physiological things to be held in a sacred way in the system?
Yes, I think that's absolutely true because in this situation, I remember this mom was waiting for her cesarean, right? Like it was a non-emergent, but it was a choice at a certain point after a very long labor, and things were happening, things were going on with her body and her baby that led to that decision. And yet we still had to wait until it was available. So it was clearly non-emergent, and also clearly that there were many and multiple. And I think there's a good example of this. For example, in Brazil, from what I understand, it is more expensive to have a vaginal birth. So the insurance pays less per cesarean because they do more cesareans. The insurance pays, sorry, the insurance pays, yeah, exactly. Do you see what I'm saying? It's more expensive. I don't know if I said it right. It's more expensive to have a vaginal physiologic birth in the hospital in Brazil than it is to have a cesarean because they do a mass quantity of cesareans, one after the other, after the other, after the other. So the system is designed for that efficiency to make more money by
So
having
what's the
more
cesarean
cesareans.
percentage in Brazil then?
Oh, it's so high. It's like,
Like,
I don't even want to say, like upwards of 90%.
okay, holy shit. Yeah, I think
That's
Peru's
what I
50 or
last
60.
remember. It's
Wow,
the high. I think it's the highest.
I'm gonna check that in
Yeah,
ChatGPT
check the
now.
numbers. But it's one of the highest countries
Yeah. Well, and
from
that's
last I
speaking
know.
on that place as well from like what are the cesarean rates in Brazil or the Brazil versus the United States versus Canada versus Europe? Like we can talk about these protocols from province to province, state to state, country to country, they can be so different. And even in the ways that I know I was treated when I transferred a town over and another family did. I mean, it's just interesting, and for me, this role of prejudice as well that comes into play. How much prejudice is involved in the way a doctor treats a patient. If a woman has darker skin versus lighter skin, is a doctor subconsciously going to be respecting a woman less or more based on appearance or money that she's making, right? Like there's so many variable things that to be a doctor, you don't have to take a prejudice test to make sure that you're not, sexist or racist or, yeah, or that you're not consciously just.
Right, right. And I think the lines like it's that's very like culture to culture and country to country in terms of, the dynamics that are going on around the conversation with race. And for sure across the Western world, that it is a big piece of the conversation and one that I really pray to cover soon on this podcast. I've been talking to a few sisters on that topic that can speak to it from experience. But like obviously in Brazil, like everyone is going to be, or almost everyone is going to be brown skin. And a lot of the doctors are as well. So like there's going to be less of that dynamic of like white doctors treating minorities in that country specifically. But to speak to this, so in private hospitals, you are right. It's around 80 to 90% of deliveries are cesarean section in Brazil. But in public hospitals, it's actually lower in public hospitals, around 40 to 45%, which is still high, obviously. But
Well, if I could just say one more thing, speaking to this
please.
protocol conversation, because I think it's really interesting. It's something that you guys have both brought up is like culture. So the culture sets the protocols and the standard of care in each community. So it's not actually based, I said it's, for safety, but it's really them creating their own safety. It's not actually evidence-based safety, right? So this is why, like you're saying, from country to country, from town to town, from practice to practice, you see differences in what is allowed. Someone will let someone go past 41 weeks. Someone induces everyone at 39 weeks in the name of this is our protocol. This is our standard of care. This is our recommendation. This is what's safest. This is just bullshit. It doesn't mean anything. It's what makes the provider feel safe. It's what the hospital has created as their sense of safety. It's not based
Oof.
on evidence.
It's what makes the practitioner feel safe.
Mhm.
Ooh, I feel
Mm,
like that is a big
that was a
statement.
massive, yeah, yeah. Well, and so I'm curious as a midwife, because when I went to speak to different midwives when I was pregnant, I did ask about their protocols, and they were not giving me black and white answers, and I felt very uncomfortable within that dynamic because if I'm asking what are your protocols, and please both of you correct me if I'm totally off here, there would be certain black and white protocols set in place of like if this is happening we transfer, or if this is happening we approach the birth in a specific sort of way. And I'm curious to know, as a midwife in the United States, what are your protocols? Do you have set protocols because you also attend free births and offer free birth and birth support? And so I'm wondering how that.
Yeah, so this is kind of where my journey begins in my transformation of my midwifery practice because I was trained in a way where, my preceptor, licensed midwives in the community, said to me the day I got my license, like, you are responsible for the life and death of this mother baby, and you should always practice in defense of yourself and always transfer if you have any thought or any reason because you don't want to be held responsible for a negative outcome. And so I negative, I mean death, morbidity, mortality, any, injury, anything like this. And so then when I started my midwifery practice and I had women sitting in front of me and I would tell them all of the things that they had to do within my practice, I would say things like, well, you need to go see a pediatrician within 72 hours. That's the protocol. And then I said, where's this protocol come from? Like, who said, people would say things like, it's the law. I was like, well, what's the law? And so I looked it up and I'm looking in the midwifery bylaws of California state and it's nothing about seeing a pediatrician within 3 days. And so I asked my midwife, like, hey, where'd you hear this, teaching that you gave to me that we have to give to everyone? And she's like, well, I heard it from my preceptor. And I'm like, well, where'd she hear it? And that's where I started to unravel, where I was like, oh, these are not based in any sort of like evidence or reality for what is right in front of me. And so I didn't believe the words that were coming out of my mouth to the women that were sitting in front of me. And so I really rethought, and I just stopped when I was in my midwifery training. I really stopped questioning everything because I was like, this is midwifery. This is the holy grail. This is the holistic women's care that I have been searching for and wanting. And so I stopped questioning a lot at that time. I was doing a lot of what I was told because it was,
Ooh,
what I knew at the time.
that's a huge point to just highlight. I stopped questioning. I just want to like echo that. I stopped
Mhm.
questioning, and just that being kind of the danger point, right? Don't stop questioning. Always think critically, always be curious. It doesn't matter the rank or the authority of the teacher in front of you. Even with Wapio, I love her so, so much. And I was studying the Zona pellucida the other day, and I'm like, this 23 in the back pocket thing, like, is that a thing? Like, really, like, and I went into it and I was like, okay, yeah, it is. And it's just not spoken at all in the semantics that she does, because she has this ability to take it into the mystical and make it so beautiful and amazing. But it is a thing. And so even when I'm studying under her, who I respect and have so much reverence for, like, I'll come up with against something and be like, wait, is this the thing? And then I go and independently research it and look into it. So like,
Mhm.
question, question
Yeah.
always. Don't stop
Yeah.
questioning.
And in this conversation, we keep mentioning protocol, and I would love to define that. I've pulled it up on my phone. So there's a few different definitions. The mass noun that we have as number one is the official procedure or system of rules governing affairs of state or diplomatic occasions. The second one is the original draft of a diplomatic document, especially in terms of a treaty agreed to in conference and signed by the parties. The third is formal or official record of scientific experimental observations. The fourth is a set of rules, the exchange or transmission between devices. Nowhere does it say a law. I don't see.
Yeah, so when it comes to midwifery protocols in California, so we have regulations, is what they are. Those are the laws of the license. They're called regulations. And so the regulations that I have are, there's only a few that are very black and white, and one of them is a little bit gray, but it's essentially in California, we're not allowed to attend breeches and twins. We're not allowed to attend births, but before 37 weeks now. It used to be 36. Before 37 weeks or after 42 weeks. And those are the ones. Those are the main like bylaws of the regulations from the state. And so for me, because I'm choosing to hold a license, because I'm choosing to be in integrity with that, those are my only boundaries. So, and I'm really transparent with women who come to me. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that I quote unquote attend free births because, like, in the definition of what is a free birth, but although women will describe their births as being free or come to me saying, I want to have a free birth with a midwife, and I'm like, okay, tell me what that means. How can I help you? What does that look like? What does that mean to you? Because that means something different to me of what you're asking for. And do you really want a free birth? Because if you do, I support you and I will support you up until that point, and you can decide if you want to invite me to your birth or not, or are you going to choose free birth? And like, I am fully supportive of that. And so, and how this came to be was women started coming to me in my practice because other midwives in the community would require things like you must get a 20-week scan if you want to be in our practice. You must get a GBS swab. You must do labs. You must do these things. You must have a backup obstetrician in a hospital. You must, there were things that women were not wanting to do. And so those women would come to me, and that was part of my process. And then I will say, like, at a certain point, I sort of leaned a little bit too far. Not too far, but I became slightly unapproachable and inaccessible because I was, spouting a lot of some ideologies and some dogmas around free birth and around ultrasounds and around testing and around never not doing things. And so I noticed patterns, right? Like women not deciding to work with me, or two women getting infections after not being sutured. And I called Wapio and I was like, "Hey, Wapio, these things keep happening." And she's like, "Well, I wonder why that is." And so we had a conversation about it, and I just kind of opened myself and like softened myself to being a lot more accessible, while at the same time being willing to go with women wherever they wanted to go and however hands on or hands off they wanted to be. And that's where I really saw the biggest shifts in how I take responsibility and like create safety in my practice is not through protocols, it's through responsibility. So it's through taking responsibility for my roles and actually putting a lot of responsibility on the people who come to work with me. Like they say they want a certain experience, and I reflect back to them like, you are responsible for that. How can I help you? And so it's a more of a relationship of deep, like radical responsibility and clarity of like what their dream birth is and where I fit in.
Right, which comes into this teaching, and we've talked about this on the podcast, so listeners will likely be aware of it, which is the teaching of quantum midwifery, right? That Wapio presents in our training, and that being this very dynamic and collaborative co-creation between mother, family, and midwife practitioner, caregiver. And, like for me in studying that and like listening to Wapio's teachings, I feel as though that piece is so wise. And I feel like, of course there's going to be families that really don't know much or don't feel empowered in themselves to be able to like hold their birth. And those people are seeking caregivers who can step in and be like, it's okay, I can hold it for you, or most of it for you at least, right? But there is this wave of women and families who are really wanting to experience the empowerment and what comes when things are left undisturbed. And I really like the reframe from free birth to undisturbed birth, because it creates a lot of spaciousness for there to actually be support, right? And then a whole new conversation in my eyes opens up around, okay, so if free birth equals this definition where there's zero support in the space and it's just mom and dad birthing solo without any support systems, then how can we bring that energetic, which is the lack of disturbance, into a supported space, right? And this is where, like for me, my download in listening to Wapio speak about quantum midwifery and speak about her practice and speak about her approach, and really activating this non-disturbed kind of energy while meeting each family where they're at, right? What does undisturbed look like and mean for you? Like that, what is undisturbed for one woman might look like practitioner way over there sitting in the corner knitting, and what might look like undisturbed for the next woman is actually the practitioner sitting there holding their hand, and just being there, but not disturbing, not telling them what to do, not, instructing anything. And so there is a spectrum there in terms of what women are wanting. But to bring the point full circle, Wapio's birth outcomes are unheard of. This woman has attended hundreds of births and has seen, correct me if I'm wrong, Catalina, one hemorrhage and one neonatal resuscitation in her career.
I thought it was no hemorrhages, actually. I
Okay.
thought it was none for her personally.
I think that she, at the end of her career, saw one hemorrhage. And so she tells this story, remember, of one of the midwives that she used to study under was having all of these hemorrhages, like 1 in 3, wasn't it? 1 in 3 of her births, she was witnessing hemorrhage. And so that is just like this whole conversation opens up around the energy, the ideas, the beliefs that a practitioner brings in, right? And so when you're speaking of like, when you use that semantic of, okay, that's a big responsibility and that's your responsibility to activate, how can I help you with that? Right? Like really in the pregnancy and in the preparation, in that care, advocating for parents, and speaking and using semantics that puts power in their hands while you're simultaneously saying, I'm here, but like these are your roles, like, and being very clear about what your role is, what it isn't. And I don't know, I just think that there's something so expansive that I feel like I'm still integrating. It's like I can see this energetic in front of me of like how the truth of that really like care provider and family mother meeting each other, like looking into each other's eyes as equals with equal respect, with equal curiosity. Like, I want to know you. Like, I want to know your heart. I want to know your preferences. I want to know your story. I want to know everything that made you who you are now and has influenced what you want now. How can we meet each other in this moment to prepare for this specific birth? And like, I don't know. Yeah, there's just something there that's really profound and beautiful, and I think has the ability to really change outcome.
I totally agree. And that is what I have seen in my experience so far, without a very high volume. But I think that's the point. I think when we start having these really busy midwifery practices, like the ones I was trained in, there's not space for us to always go as deep as we need to go. And I say like go deep. And I had the funniest experience with a fourth time mom who came to me because I was like, I'm the midwife who goes deep. We have long prenatals, we drink tea, we go for hikes, we eat soup, we go deep. And I was like, what will be the most nurturing thing for you for, this time that we have together? And she's like, make it simple, keep it easy. She would come for 30 minutes. She was in and out. I was like, okay, this is what this mama needs. And this is what my practice is to like meet her, And she was like, I was like, what's your dream birth? And she's like, well, I want to give birth to my baby and I want you to walk in the door 5 minutes later with a baby in one arm and a placenta in the other. And I said, okay. And I arrived at her house, and that is well, the placenta, the baby was in her husband's arms, and the placenta was on the floor. And she was like, she was kneeling, the placenta was between the two of them. So, this is exactly what happens, and this is a level of alignment that I'm seeing where I'm seeing outrageous things that like I never saw in my midwifery training. I never thought were possible, to the point where like my free birth experience unfolded exactly as I had envisioned. And as I'm working really deeply with like clarity and truth and alignment in meeting women where they are in their birth visions and getting really clear together, I'm seeing this happen over and over and over again. I'm not seeing a disturbance because I'm present at a woman's birth.
Right. Right.
And I'm
And I
really
think
reframing, I'll just say reframing birth sabotage, what that really is, because it's like there's that story. And I had that story of like, I didn't trust other midwives. I was like really afraid of other midwives sabotaging births. And what I'd like to reframe that as is like disturbing. Like they're disturbing women and they're disturbing themselves. Like we have to get undisturbed in our truth in order to be a witness for undisturbed birth.
oof, that was another big sentence. So what does that mean to be undisturbed in your truth? Can you describe that a bit more?
I think for me, because I've seen what happens when I'm at a birth that I'm not supposed to be at. So I was talking with a member of our group, our study group recently, and she was talking about how birth work is soul work. And when when my soul has been at a birth that I was not supposed to be at, there was very bad outcomes for me and for them. Not like death or anything like this, but just like on a psychological, spiritual, physical level, it was felt that I was very much not supposed to be there. And so there can be so much ego involved in birth work. It's so activating. There's so much, right? There's so many wounds. There's so much that it can give us energetically. And I think it's like being in a ceremony. It's like being with medicine. It's like I do not mess around anymore with this sort of thing. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. And I all the sense. But I would love for you to describe it a little bit more in terms of your personal inner process around it and like how are you assessing when like that knowing of I
Mhm.
know I'm supposed to be here and what has it in the past looked like and felt like in your body or in your experience when you're describing this like a birth I should not have been at.
Mhm. So now I think I'm tapping a lot more into like some of my more intuitive gifts. And so there is definitely this like open channel when I first have a conversation with someone where it can be like an immediate yes or an immediate no. And so I would say that I do potentially come on a little bit strong in like an initial interview process where I'm like pretty clear about who I am, what responsibility I take, and what my expectations are. And that I expect a lot from people who I work with, and a lot in the way of like, you are responsible for doing your own inner work. And this is the work of preparing for birth. And you are the only one who can truly do that for yourself. Because I just saw over and over again in midwifery practice, like people showing up for their midwifery visits and expecting the midwife to be responsible really truly for like the outcome of their birth. And so for me it's a heavy kind of like vetting process both on like a energetic and physical spiritual level. It's getting to know the partner, the woman, everyone involved, getting a really detailed history and story, and then also a curiosity too, because I have had situations where it doesn't look like, oh, they're sovereign, free birth, spiritual people, who would quote unquote look or seem or feel like people often say, well, there must be a certain type of person who comes to you. And like, there is, but my goal is really not for that. Like, my goal is really to be able to like expand and meet more people where they are. And so, and then also, for example, in the middle of care, if something comes up, because it has, like, I'm not afraid to speak to something. Like, I had a situation with a client and their partner, and I was feeling unsafe in the relationship with the partner. And I wasn't sure if I was supposed to be at that birth. And I had to have a really hard conversation with that mom, and she was like, well, what do I got to do? Break up with my boyfriend in order for you to come to the birth? And I said, well, no, I don't expect you to do that, but I need to be able to have this level of conversation with you. We need to be able to talk about this and create a resolution. And I'm not just going to sweep it under and show up at the birth and expect that everything's going to be all right.
Emma, you're on mute, my love.
You mentioned it's the mother's responsibility to do the inner work for birth and this like inner work birth preparation. And I'm curious to know how would you define, would you say inner work for a mother preparing for birth or even a family, right? Because she's not her partner and all of that. What does that look like for you? And how would you explain that to, I mean, anyone listening, any clients that you have, and Sam, feel free to also, I know that I was doing a lot of inner work my pregnancy and I, I don't know how much you know about my story, but my birth was exceedingly traumatic and my son passed away and I was in a coma, these things, but it was not without me showing up and meeting all of these deep, scary places within. And so I'm curious to know if maybe you guys would have some, yeah, some insight for other listeners as well as to like, what does this birth prep look like? Also knowing that just because we do internal work doesn't mean we're not going to be met with difficult outcomes that we need to then,
Well, I can't, tell anybody what their inner work would be, but what I can say is that in the case of an unexpected outcome and in the situations I have been in difficult and unexpected outcomes, that is the most important preparation. Well, that's what we're preparing for, actually, truthfully. And I talk about preparing for death, and I talk about preparing, if we're going to talk about all the outcomes of birth, everything that can happen, all the possibilities, then it's important for me to talk about these things and to get a read on where people's boundaries, where their risk aversions lie, and what they're willing to do or what they're not willing to do. And so I would say, just to speak that out, right? Like, well, we're preparing for birth, but what are we really preparing for, right? Is like for the unexpected, for the unknown, for the mystery. Like, that is the work of midwifery. Like, I'm talking about these aligned births where women are getting exactly what they want and babies are coming out like in a perfect visionary way. um and that's the easy part, you know.
Right.
The other part
Exactly.
is, right, what nobody wants to talk about, and where midwives freeze. So, like, when that does happen at a home birth, or midwives freeze in the moment, they freeze in the postpartum, they don't know how to support. You know, my own experience was that my midwife was unavailable for integration after my first birth, after a shoulder dystocia resuscitation. Like, she couldn't handle it, because she was so shocked by the fact that, like, what if my daughter wasn't here? That she didn't have the resourcing or capacity. um, and like I said, I had another client who her baby came out in a way that was very unexpected. And she looked me in the eyes and she said, if my baby's going to die, I want them to die at home. And I said, okay, that baby didn't die. That baby is healthy and well and alive. But I did a lot of support at home for that family. I was at the birth for 24 hours after the baby was born. You know, like, that was the work that I was there to do.
Right. And I do want to just like kind of ask a question to you, Emma, like because I feel like her response is really beautiful and actually in a really big way speaks to you from the way that I see you, and really speaks to your process since your birth and since your loss of your son. I when I look at you, I see very clearly how exactly what she just named is moving through you, is embodied in you, and is actually the blessing and the medicine of the ways in which you prepared, because you continued to meet yourself in the depth of how you prepared. You didn't shy away, like you dove head first into the depth of it and you let yourself be consumed by it, and then you slowly made your way out. But your ability to even meet yourself in the depth of it, that to begin with, to me, speaks volumes to how you were meeting yourself already, how you were meeting life already.
Um, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I yeah, a new life and an easy birth is, you know, because realistically, these do come. A lot of the time, emergence happen, whether it's in 5 hours or 13, whatever, 3 days. Like they're all different, but most of the time, I think, yeah, emergence can be smooth. Um, but I went into birth knowing that not every emergence will result in a live baby because of my previous experiences. And that was a big part of my preparation and knowing. And then being met by my community with people that had other trauma where, like, there was one woman who her brother and her died in childbirth, but the doctor is the hero in that story. And so she um, cast a lot of bladder, like this whole thing. And it's interesting because I know that I was doing a lot of this internal work because of the path that I had already walked up until that point. Me, that, yeah, was supposed to be supportive. I don't know if they did that work just in the ways that they met me and the situation. Because again, I think in the birth space, there really is this hero complex of if you do everything right, the outcome is always going to be good. And the doctor is the hero and the midwife is the hero. And you just have to submit and surrender to the doctor. And while I agree with, yes, we have to submit and surrender to a birth keeper is not where I think it. I think we need to submit and surrender to birth. Sitting at the feet of Jane Hardwick, and she said that we need to trust birth and we need to trust death. And this is where what the phrasing birth work really comes into play. It's really like it it's grief work, it's death work, and sometimes the death of the maiden to make room for the mother, but sometimes there is very real death in place. And the preparation isn't just for mom, the way that you guys were describing. It's in the relationship between mom and partner and mom and baby and mom and birth provider, mom and birth in general. How is mom relating and uh, interacting herself? Um, yeah, I.
Well, I think that's what I mean about that. That's exactly what I'm describing about this inner work and this relationship with birth. And the ironic thing about the women who I support who choose free birth, I always make myself available, like, oh, you could call me when you're in labor if you need support, because if they're like at a distance, not a single one has ever called me. I've gotten a text like, hey, I'm going into labor in the morning. Hey, the baby's here. Or, hey, we transferred to the hospital. This is what happened. But like, even in those scenarios, they haven't called on me. They've only called on themselves, and that's not to say nobody ever will, but that's to say that is the point. Like, that is my best outcome. It's like, I have worked myself out of a job to a degree that when it comes time for the birth, like, I can be there and I can be a support as needed. But there's a really big difference in a woman who is internally resourcing themselves with birth, you know, than constantly like reaching out, right? Or outsourcing throughout the
Mhm,
birth experience.
mhm. And I want to bring up this little point of offering of a continued conversation where in this world, you create your reality, which Sam we've touched on already. When it comes to birth prep and talking about all the potential outcomes, with the women that I've spoken to, I could hear a fear of like, well, I don't want to talk about potential death or potential nuchal cord or potential cord prolapse or hemorrhage or whatever because I don't want to manifest that into my birth space. I don't want to call that in, so I don't want to talk about it. Um, and in this world of spirituality and free birth and just birth in general and the consciousness on our planet right now, I feel like that's a really important piece. And as we're talking about birth prep, I think it's important to also mention that talking about death in the birth space doesn't bring it to you. Talking about negative outcomes.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between what you're speaking to and, like, let's just say like the nocebo effect, right? Like planting fears and doubts and seeds of worry into a woman unnecessarily, right? So I know midwives who talk about transferring to the hospital every prenatal visit. So if you have to have a transfer, here's what will happen. So if you have to have a transfer, where are we going to go? So if you have to have a transfer, like every prenatal meeting, there's this conversation. Whereas I think Wapio describes too, like, we can have one really deep, direct conversation about complications and what to do if and when and how we might handle that situation, and we can get really clear. And then it's done. We don't need to go on and on. We don't need to talk about it every
Exactly.
time. We don't need to indulge into the fears.
Right.
But we do need to look them in the eyes
Mhm.
and admit that they're present.
And, like Wapio is also teaching, from this place of each practitioner needs to determine their filters when it comes to interacting with families, and the practitioner needs to equally be in the process of deciding, is this a mother and family that's aligned for me to support? right? Which has been like a really massive teaching for me because I feel like, that has never really been presented in that way. And in a lot of care professions and professions rooted in service, it's like you serve those that come and ask for it, but in the space of birth, there is such a vast spectrum in terms of education, belief systems, thoughts about birth, etc. when it comes to care providers. And so there is a care provider out there for everyone. And the wisdom of being able to say, I think that I'm not your highest aligned care provider to a family, that is care, right? Like you're actually providing high quality care to that family by saying, I think I'm not fully aligned for you because I hear you expressing certain needs or certain beliefs or certain things that aren't aligning fully with me. And what I want for you is full alignment for you, right? It's not about me. It's not going to be the best care for you if I just bend my beliefs or bend, something that's actually real and alive and inside of me just to try to care for you, right? There's that sweeping under the rug kind of thing that's going on. So,
And I wonder
yeah.
how those conversations could go because I'm reflecting on one woman in the community where I live in British Columbia, where her midwife dropped her like halfway through, like I think she was maybe 25 weeks, like just about like pretty halfway. And she felt like she had no other option to free birth. It went well, bless, that's very good. Um, but I'm curious to know how you would have that conversation. Would you then refer this family out to another midwife that's local? And would you make sure that that was in place before? And how would those?
Well, for me, I can speak into like ideally in the first conversations before there's ever even been the process of like a hiring, you kind of bring up some strong points to kind of get an idea and get a feel for where people are at. For example, I was actually meeting with a family a couple of days ago, and the dad has never seen a birth, and so he was kind of expressing like certain just kind of like unsureness, and he kind of kept reframing back to like what's my process, but like what's my process, because the way that I was talking was very much so like what's your process, kind of like asking them questions, trying to get a feel for where they were at. I would speak obviously certain things like, my process is that we really go deep in prenatals and that we do a blend between education and psychological work. And that means that we'll go deep into meeting things like fears and like unpacking belief systems and really having really in-depth conversation so that the foundation of our dynamic is friendship and connection. And so we enter the birth space, all of us feeling connected to one another, feeling familiar with one another, feeling trust in one another, so I'd speak some of those things. But like, we really had to go in this back and forth dynamic for him to really understand that my process is what I kind of just described, right? This collaborative process. And once it clicked, he was like, oh, wow, that's really beautiful, like, and so then that was like, oh, okay, it's a yes for him. And he wants to meet in that way, even though, he might have come into the conversation expecting an authoritative care provider because that's what doctors do. That's what most people have experienced in regards to their care provider, and so that was just kind of, I think, the orientation and the expectation. And as the conversation unfolded, and he could understand more and more what I was saying and the way in which I work and navigate, it was like, oh, that's exciting, that's expansive, like, and he was like, it was landing in a way that was like, oh, and so even though he hadn't had that preconceived idea at all, like I can read those subtle cues, right? I can feel into those of like, he wasn't like frowning and like, but wait, like what happens if, and he wasn't coming forward with like fear, 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 fear. He was like, oh, sitting back, integrating, like, wow, this is beautiful, And so like just even going off of that, right? And first I met with this mother separately and we had a beautiful connection, and there was, like, it was like, oh, we felt like, oh yeah, we can be friends and we can really co-create and beautiful, So for me, it's like really creating enough space before there's even been a yes, like, and for me, like if a family were to not want to go deep into like the psychological processing, I would refer out. You know, if they're like, oh, no, 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 we don't want any of that. Like, we're good. Our beliefs are good. We don't have fears. I'd be like, beautiful. Okay, amazing. These are the women I know in the field, you know, like, and without any like actually sticky energy, like actually beautiful. If that's where you are at, and that's the truth that you're anchoring into, beautiful. But the way that I want to support families is through this dynamic going into the deeper realms and going into the vulnerable places and meeting each other there, because I carry the belief that vulnerability is a gateway and a pathway to connection, and I believe that connection is a gateway and a pathway to safety, and I believe that safety is a gateway and a pathway to opening. And what are we trying to do in birth? You know, so that's my process. Those are my beliefs. Those are my biases that I am allowed to carry, right? And I'm allowed to wait for the families that match that frequency and are excited by that frequency to find me, and for then us to walk together. You know, I'm looking to right now support maybe 2 families a year. Like, and just study and have all of the other things that I'm holding unraveling around me, you know? So like I really get to wait for those 2 full yeses. And that doesn't mean that there's going to be perfect outcomes, of course, you know, that doesn't mean I'm guaranteeing something, but it means that that's a function of my filter and my process in terms of landing in that yes.
Right. And it sounds like, I mean, even Catalina, in the earlier part of our conversation, you said that you're like kind of, I don't think you used the word intense, but you said that your vetting process, like you're really bold in the beginning. And I can hear that from both of you, where it's you're really stepping forward with like, this is who I am, this type of midwifery that I do, and that level of kind of figures out who the families that are most aligned for you that you're going to serve. You figure that out earlier on instead of
Right.
waiting until later, and it's like, oh well, now you have to create.
Right.
Yeah, and this
Right.
this is not the
Exactly.
prevailing narrative of midwifery care in terms of the quote unquote modern traditional midwifery care system. It's like, okay, fill your month, book your due dates before I get filled. So women are choosing their care providers, even OBs, right, at like 6, 7 weeks. And my question is like, how do you know, unless maybe you know this person in your community, how do you know that that person is going to be the person you want to invite to your birth in 8 months from now? You know, someone who you don't even know, that you're making a commitment, that you're giving thousands of dollars of unrefundable deposit money to say, this is a person I want to show up at my birth. And this is the capitalization and the commodification of the art and the practice of midwifery, and how it is so misaligned for me with the truth of, true traditional midwifery and what it's come to mean to me. And so I have a very similar process. And at the same time, so I saw, midwives who would change themselves to like fit the mold of each person who was in front of them and not be fully in their truth. And then I saw myself be too aggressive to the point where I was pushing away everyone except for like one very specific type of person. And so now I found myself right in this like sweet middle spot where like I can be me, I can be clear, I can be authentic, but I can also be extremely direct and transparent. And what some of my clients have said is like a fierce mother, fierce mother energy, where I'm willing to also like call people out, right? On like, okay, I hear you're saying this, but you're choosing this. So which is it? Like, what
Mm,
are we doing here?
yeah, I love that. I mean, and even in the earlier part of the conversation, an example could be a woman calling on you saying, I want a free birth. And you're like, okay, I'm a midwife. How do you define that? Like, what is it that you're actually asking for? Let's get clear. Let's be curious about you're using this word, and what is it that you're wanting? And can I provide that for you?
Exactly. Yeah. Instead of just shutting people out and away and saying like, well, I don't do that. Or, oh, you want a free birth? Well, that means that you can't have a midwife involved in your care if you really want to claim a free birth or whatever. It's really stripped me and humbled me of all of my beliefs and dogmas and ideologies. And I think at the end of the day, and to like wrap my part of the conversation is like this all came through from my own true embodied experience, right? Of like the reason why I chose as a midwife wild pregnancy and free birth after the unraveling of not believing the things I was saying in my practice to women and the things I was doing. I was like, it was kind of a, an self experiment of like, can I trust birth to the level that I say and know to be true in my body? And how can I use that experience to transform my midwifery practice and serve women from that place of like everything we learn in midwifery school from the basics, right? Of like trusting birth, not checking cervixes unnecessarily, not disturbing birth, like all the theoretical, and then how disrupted that became in the actual clinical practice of apprenticeship in a traditional modern midwifery model to a return through my own personal embodied experience of a undisturbed birth.
Can you uh, can you describe?
Well, I will say that in my process of preparing for birth, it was very much a process of preparing for death. Like I just tried on almost every day. What if my baby dies? My husband was like, "What do I do if you're bleeding and pass out? Do I just let you die or do I call 911?" Like we were on this level of like we needed to be really, cuz he didn't know how far I was willing to go. Like this was like really crazy for him, but also like I appreciate him so much for like even being willing to ask me that question. Like that's how devoted he was to honoring my sovereignty and autonomy and choice. Like, well, I'm so glad he asked me that question. And it was such a powerful moment of like, no, if I feel that there's something intuitive, that I need to do or shift or change, that I will. And so I think to trust birth is to trust death because just shared very recently, like yesterday, a conversation I had with a woman that birth and death are literally one thing. It is there is no separation between the circle of life and death, and not only in like physical life and death and birth, but another friend reminded me like our cells, every cell in our body, every second is dying and being reborn. Like we are literal entities of constant death and rebirth on the cellular level of our entire bodies. And so, this idea that birth and death are entering in and out through the same door, through the same portal, and that my friend so beautifully expressed like, with birth comes grief. And so, what I'm also reorienting towards is like, are we preparing for birth? Are we preparing for death in birth? Or are we really preparing for grief? Like the actual emotion that comes with the experience of the loss of the identity combined with like the oxytocin and the overwhelming sense of love. So like, yeah, I was preparing physically, like, what if my baby's born with a problem and it dies? But what I was really preparing for was really the totality of the peak life experiences of moving through the portal of life and death.
Oof, that's so beautiful. Yeah, I just had a ripple of downloads while you were talking. How are you
Yeah,
doing, Emma?
goosebumps on goosebumps on goosebumps on goosebumps. And in the spirit of birth the middle way, I'm going to define trust over here. There's two definitions, but we're leaning not into like a law of trust, like money that you're going to come into. Definition: a firm belief in the reliability, truth, someone or something. So to trust
Beautiful.
in birth is to trust in the ability of birth. To trust death is to trust in the ability, the truth of these things. And what are these things if not wild and mystery? And how in the fucking hell do you mysterious unknown thing like
But you trust in the truth. You trust in the truth that it is that mysterious, wild, unpredictable thing. And the piece that's like, piece that's hitting me so hard is that you prepare for grief no matter what. That is such a profound teaching. You prepare for grief no matter what, because there will be expressions of death no matter what. Even if physically mom and baby are alive at the beginning of the process, there are numerous death processes that elicit the experience of grief. And, I think to liberate, that's such a liberating truth, to liberate women with that truth, because we want ideally for the birth of our baby to just be all butterflies and rainbows and everything perfect and beautiful, and it is, but it's also more than that. There's more to the truth, there's more to the full picture, and the woman is letting go of the maiden and letting go of her past self, her past life. There's so much letting go, there's so much death in order for that rebirth of the mother and the new version of this woman, and so many aspects of it all, right? Like, postpartum is a space with which little grief processes almost always come up in some way, shape, or form. So that is just, I don't know, you saying that hit me in a really big way. There's so much truth in that. And to just reframe it of like, what if we are approaching death or birth through the preparation for the preparation of death and grief, expecting it in one way, shape, or another.
Yeah. Well, and at Earth Daughters this past weekend, there was a song that we were singing, like 700 women gathered, and we kept singing this song. And one of the lines was, "We are women, um, the bringers of life." And I kept whispering, like after every single line, and I would just like keep whispering because like, for myself, I'm like, I need this validation right now. But recognizing that women really are, like, even with our cycles and our bleed every month, like, we are constantly holding death, constantly holding new life, constantly holding death, constantly holding new life. This cycle of both of those being the same thing, being the very same thing, and just like trust birth and death is to trust in truth. Birth are both mysteries, is hidden at every single like, I'm wish my journal was here. Line.
Thank you, ladies, so much. I mean, if, my mission and Wapio's mission is really to like share the power of birth's really responsibility to shaping, right, the future of our humanity. And I think if I can just, yeah, say one thing is like this expressed grief, and grief illiteracy that is so rampant in our culture today. Like this conversation is bringing me to how birth has the power to shift that if we acknowledge the grief in the birth, and that there's an imprinting of safety in expressing and feeling our grief.
Absolutely. And not just for mom and baby or partner, but
Right. Ooh.
wow.
All
Wow.
right.
Thank
Well,
you so
that one's
much
settled.
for thank you for being here and having this conversation. You're welcome anytime if you're free next week.
Thank you.
We'll have
She
tea.
just started her own podcast, which I celebrate for you.
Amazing.
Congratulations.
Thank
Yay.
you.
Do you want to share with the listeners what that podcast is? What
Sure. Yeah. I just started the Midwife of Healing podcast. So it's going to be a lot of different conversations with teachers and healers and mothers, and sovereign birth stories, but also midwifery attended birth stories from this lens of really reflecting a sovereignty, women who have sovereign experiences in their births with a midwife, which I find really beautiful to share. And then again, we'll be definitely talking about grief and death and all of these kinds of things. And I do have an Instagram, catalina.clark. And on my website, I do offer virtual sessions for women preparing for sovereign births or integrating experiences. I'm also do breath work for birth preparation, another inner journey work for preparing for birth. And yeah, you can find me online.
And we'll share all of that
Oh,
information as well.
yeah, it's catalinaclarkbirth.com.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Much for joining us for this conversation. It's been such a pleasure to have you, and you brought up some big points that I'm sure even we'll be integrating and digesting for the days to come. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Hope everyone has a beautiful day.